So hopefully you're all up and running with your virtual machine. Sometimes it does take a little bit longer. So if you've managed to get everything working, then perfect. Now you can move on to the ironically easier part of actually working with Laravel. The first thing that we want to do is boot up our virtual machine. So I'm currently within my Homestead directory that we saw earlier, and I'm just going to run Vagrant up to bring my machine up. And now that's done, I can just SSH into that so we can start to install Laravel. Now, anything you do with your Laravel project, when we get onto that a bit later, you're going to want to do within your virtual machine. Now, the reason for this is that your virtual machine acts as your server. So when you push this live, then you want it to kind of be running on the same environment. So you want to kind of stick to doing everything inside of your virtual machine. It makes a lot more sense. So to actually get Laravel installed, we're going to pull up the installation docs. Remember, we're using 5.2. And down here we have this installing Laravel section. Now all we need to do is using Composer, which is already installed on our box because Homestead just contains it. We want to just run this command. So we just paste that in, and I already have this installed here, but for you it will just go ahead and download a few things and you'll be ready to use Composer globally. Okay, so now that that's done, it's literally as easy as running Laravel new and then the name of the project that you want to create. So in our case, I want to create one called Fresh, but I'm not in the right directory. So remember, we mapped everything to this www directory, and I want to create it in here with the rest of my projects, and then I can map this over. So we just say Laravel new, and throughout the series, we're going to be working with a project called Fresh. So that goes ahead and crafts our application. It downloads all of the Composer dependencies that Laravel requires. And once this is finished, we'll be ready to set up our actual site so we can view this in the browser. Okay, so that has finished, and you'll notice just down here a couple of things. If this hasn't finished for you and your Composer dependencies are still downloading, just go ahead and come back to this in just a moment. So the first thing that we're doing here is copying over an env.example file to .env. Now you might be wondering, what on earth is that? Well, we're going to cover what this file does and what its main purpose is. We also have things like clearing compiled with Composer, Artisan, Optimize, which basically just optimizes everything by dumping out autoloader. And we have a key generation here, which we're going to look at as well, because if you don't install Laravel via this method at any point, you'll need to know how to generate an application key. And we'll also talk about what that's useful for later. So our application is ready, it tells us here, and we can see that within a folder just here. But we obviously can't access this in the browser. You'll notice that if we go ahead and pull this up in our browser, we basically just get an endless loading. So this is how we want things to look. And the reason that port 8000 is here is simply because this is mapped to port 80 on our virtual machine. So we want this to be called fresh.app. This just makes sense. For local development, I tend to set the top level domain to app. And then obviously we access port 8000, and then we can access anything else as part of this. So how do we get all this working? Well, what I'm going to do is open a new tab in my console, and inside of, if I go back one directory, inside of my .homestead file or folder, this contains our homestead.yaml file. So let's just open this up in Sublime. So it's homestead.yaml. And inside of here, this is where we customize our sites. All we need to do is just add this in. Really straightforward. So in our case, we will want to say fresh.app. And where do we want to map that to? Well, it's in home, Vagrant. And remember, this is the path within the virtual machine. www fresh public. Now the reason it's public is because this is the access point to our Laravel application. So now that we've done this, we're not quite done. What we actually need to do is go ahead and provision our machine. This will just take all of these settings into account. So let's go and cd back a directory, and we'll go into our main homestead directory, not our .homestead directory. And all we need to do is run vagrant provision. So that's done, and our new site will have been activated. However, there's a problem. Let's just go and hit this again, and you'll see it still doesn't work. Why is this? Well, basically, you have a hosts file, and we need to map our local machine to this domain. So all we need to do is we need to open up Etsy hosts within Sublime. Remember, I'm using a Unix-based system, but obviously if you're working with Windows, highly recommend you just go online, search on how to change your hosts file. And here, all I want to do is map localhost to fresh.app. That's all we need to do. And you might need to give this admin permission. So now that we've done this, head over here, hit refresh, and there we go. We have a Laravel 5 project set up. Now, if you're struggling with this process, don't worry too much. It's highly unlikely you're going to have to keep building these. If you're working on a project, you really just have to do this once at the start, and then you can just carry on developing. And really, it's a pretty straightforward process once you get used to it. So we now have a fresh Laravel 5.2 installation, and we can continue learning how to work with Laravel.